In fact, there's a report out there that they're so convinced that we are spying on them, that we've bugged their offices because their bad ideas get out into the community. No, we don't bug your office. We didn't need to do that. You surround yourself with people who don't trust you, and you surround yourself with bad ideas. That's what happens. And so me and mine choose trust with good people, because that in the end is how you make good policy, and that's how you overcome these difficult times.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Today on the show, we have the first two openly gay Anchorage Assembly members, former Chair Felix Rivera, who represents Midtown, and current Vice Chair Christopher Constant, who represents Downtown. We talk about their experiences growing up, what their lives were like in Anchorage prior to politics, and what they've been like since joining the Assembly in 2017. We also discuss, as you heard in that opening clip, completely unfounded allegations that the Assembly bugged the 8th floor of City Hall, where Mayor Bronson's office is. Felix Rivera, Christopher Constant, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. So I wanted to start off with Felix. You are originally from San Antonio, Texas.
Yeah.
And that is, by Alaskan standards, an enormous city. Can you talk about growing up in San Antonio and what that experience was like?
Yeah, so San Antonio, at the time when I was growing up there, yes, big city, but it really had this small town feel. And, I really loved growing up there. I felt like it was a fairly progressive community. And, it was a place where I was challenged. Texas is a big state, and we're big into competition, right? Like, you have to win competitions. It's just a modality in Texas, is how we think as Texans, and I still carry that part of me. And so I would be involved in all kinds of competitions, from entomology, which is the science and study of bugs, to academic competitions, to competitions with my music. I played viola growing up. It was a place where I learned to be competitive, and that's where I got that sort of stride.
Entomology competitions. Yeah. Can you talk about, was that in grade school, or when did you get into a bug competition?
So, that was in high school when I got into bug competitions, and bugs and insects. And so there is Future Farmers of America. Mm-hmm. That was a program that I was enrolled in my high school. And that's when I got involved in the study of bugs. And basically, it's this competition where you go around and you have to properly identify a series of bugs and insects, and whoever correctly identifies the most wins. And it could be tricky because the insect world, they try to copy each other, and so some insects and bugs you thought were this aren't that. And I fell in love with it. I think partly because I was just really good at it. It was partly rote memorization, and partly, trying to see the deception and tricks and things. And one of the funny stories in that, one of the awards that I got for winning a competition at Texas Tech was I got this colony of Madagascar hissing cockroaches. And so the look on my mom's face when I brought those back and say, "Hey, Mom, look what I got." She loved it.
So, Lubbock. So you traveled around Texas. Mm-hmm. I'm from Texas. I'll say I do know that we have a lot of bugs there. Not as many bugs in Alaska. Mm-hmm. Were you escaping the bugs?
The reason that I came up to Alaska sort of on paper was to go to study at Alaska Pacific University. But I think a big part was just to explore and find myself. One of the things about growing up in Texas is I couldn't be myself as much as I wanted to be. I actually tried coming out in high school and had to go back into the closet because it was just such a nasty and negative experience, even in a progressive city like San Antonio. And so I needed to go somewhere where I could explore, and Alaska's the place to do that.
Was your family a conservative or progressive family? I mean, how would you describe the politics of the family?
Yeah, so now, my mom is a registered Democrat, but I think when I was growing up, I think they were much more conservative. And when I came out, it wasn't until I moved up here that I actually came out. But when I came out, my dad, he knew, right? Like, he wasn't surprised by it. But my mom, she was shocked, which is sort of weird because if you think about it, like, my mom and I's thing was we would watch a lot of telenovelas, which are soap operas in Spanish. And, so me now, I'm like, why didn't I know? Like, duh, obvious. And my mom, like, hello. But it was just our thing. We loved doing that. And, I remember one time during the telenovelas, we were watching commercial break. And there was like this commercial for tattoos. And my mom was like, I don't know why people would want to get tattoos. That's so strange, changing the body that God gave you. But Felix, if you want to get tattoos, feel free to do that. The only thing, though, that you can't do, that you can't be, is gay. And I thought it was like a really random
How old
remark.
were you then?
I was sometime in high school. So I was probably 15, 16.
And are you from a Mexican family?
Puerto Rican.
Puerto Rican.
Mm-hmm.
And did you go to church a lot? I mean, were you all...
Oh, yeah. Catholic church all the way. Cradle baby, for sure.
Gotcha. So how's your family now?
Yeah, now they're totally accepting of it. And, I think there's still parts of it that they probably don't understand, and they may never understand just because of the way that they grew up is just totally different. But, no, they're accepting of it. It's not too much of a conversation anymore. Like, they get it. It's my life.
Roger. Okay, Christopher Constant.
Morning.
Morning. Same question. Where'd you grow up? What was your life like growing up?
So I was born in this small town called Santa Maria, California, raised on what's called the Central Coast of California, which is a very lovely part of the state. It's kind of smack dab between LA and San Francisco on the coast, tucked inside of a mountain range. The kind of way the environment is around there, they say it's green when the rest of the world is white and brown when the rest of the world is green. It's a beautiful place. Hearst built his castle on the mountains there. It was at the time a very small town, 25,000 people back in the 70s. And it has actually grown now to be the largest city between LA and San Francisco, which is interesting. And it was a farming community. It's now a wine community with some farming. That meant that my community was very diverse because you had migrant workers coming up from Mexico and who had been there forever, but were still in the migrant farm working world. And actually, it's one of the fondest memories I have of going back there now is people are still working the land. Unlike much of California, people are still there, it's a lovely thing. For my part, I went to a high school where there were 3 high schools. Now there are 4 in that town, and they were divided by the school I went to, which was a primarily Mexican school. There was the kind of poor white people school, and then there was the private Catholic school where the rich kids went. And so I had the benefit of graduating from a class of 400 where 20 of us were native English speakers and everyone else was something else, and that really was a valuable lesson for the rest of my life. One of my sociology mates in college called it, "Oh, you were the dot in the sea." And I'm like, yeah, that's how it was for me, which taught me a lot about how to be a member of a community. The issue of coming out, it's a funny and interesting one for me, I think. My grandmother, when I was 15, I was over for dinner alone with her, and she asked me, "Honey, are you gay?" And in my mind, I just thought I could lie or I could tell the truth. I was kind of for a second panicked, and I decided, I'm going to tell the truth. So I told her, yes, I'm gay, 15. Now, my parents divorced when I was 2. So 13 years had passed since my grandmother had talked to my father. That day, she called every member of my family and told them I was gay, and including him, which was probably a very joyful experience for her to be able to tell him that. And so immediately, banded off, my family was all on the same page. My dad didn't like it. My mom didn't understand it. My sisters were like, whatever. So that started early for me. And my my youth and when I came out, between when I was about 15 and 18, was literally the peak of the AIDS crisis. And 218 miles to the south of me, everybody was dying, and 218 miles to the north of me, everybody was dying. And that experience went all the way through college with me until I graduated, basically. In the middle of my college experience, about 1994, the therapeutics started to emerge and the world started to change, but I had, inside of myself, been very much in a defensive mode. I was going to survive. And so even though I was gay, I was not being gay. I was just being me and not having sex, kind of trying to stay alive, which is a very strange phenomenon, except for when, as a young person, the urges take over and you have to, and it's scary. But on a different topic, like, everyone always asks me how I get my start in politics, in service. And I laugh because I did not do bug class or camp. I didn't do FFA. I did leadership camp in high school. And I served with what an organization is called the California Association of Student Councils. It's like a statewide association of 18 regions of high school leadership that come together for summer camps and then plot policy changes and work hard to ensure they... When I was in the group, we fought and got elected through the law a youth member to the state school board, right? And we have that here as an advisory position, but think about it, in California, it's a much bigger challenge. Millions and millions of people. So another feature of my youth, my grandfather was an engineer for Martin Marietta and for Lockheed Martin and Lockheed for that. And we were all part of the shuttle program at the time. And the whole plan was to move the shuttle program to California, to the Western launch pad at Vandenberg Air Force Base. And so my life was actually leading me into that environment at the time. But then the shuttle blew up and it totally destroyed the economy of my town, which was just preparing to become the place where all of that work was going to center out of. And so that kind of took me off the pin of my life. Where am I going to go? And then kind of oddly discovered the Grateful Dead. And with my friends, we went on a kind of adventure to the Bay Area. I saw this music, fell in love, and then turned into a vagabond. And crisscrossed the country, hitchhiking, and ended up in Maine, had a great several summers out there, and realized I had a wanderlust. And that wanderlust for several years brought me to Alaska. And when I came up for the holidays, actually in 1995, I came back to fish that summer, college, trying to make some money. And I was one of those people who spent $2,000 to get here and get set up, and it was a bust. I earned $1,000. And so I spent money to come to Alaska to fish. I didn't make money. And but still, it bit me, and I was hooked.
2 quick questions. So was it your maternal grandmother that called your father to tell him that you were gay? And I want to just explore that whole idea of you coming out at a time when gay men were dying of AIDS everywhere.
Yep.
We're from relatively similar generation. And I know that for me, when I came out, what everyone's kind of go-to thing was like crying because they thought I was going to die.
Right.
Like that I was just basically like saying that there was a death sentence.
Yep.
So that was similar for you.
Absolutely. I mean, I can recall the first week when the weekly paper in San Francisco didn't have an obituary, when there were hundreds of them at one time, right? There were years where the obituary pages were all AIDS victims. My peer group dying were the elders who I would look up to dying. And so absolutely, that was the time.
But I feel like there's a hangover. So Felix, did you, even though you're much younger than us, did you experience any of that with coming out with people thinking like, oh, you're going to die of AIDS?
No, not at all. Most of what I experienced when I first came out in high school was people thought, my soul was going to be damned to hell, right? Mm-hmm. That was that experience. Up here, when I came up out in Alaska, most people were very supportive, and they were like, "Yeah, cool, that's your thing, then fine." The whole, what prior generations have faced when they came out, I just don't think it exists today.
You came up to go to APU, And what were you going to study there, or what?
So I originally came up to study marine biology and then ended up switching to a degree in liberal studies with a focus on journalism.
And did you find Anchorage to be an accepting place for you?
I did, yeah. It was a community where I felt like I could, I was invited in. I was invited to join the club and to get involved and to take leadership roles. And, it was a place where I felt seen, I think, for the first time. Not that in Texas, you had to work so hard just to get noticed because there's so many people in Texas. Here, much smaller population base, it's just much easier to get integrated and get involved in the community.
Mm-hmm. And what year did you move here?
Moved here in 2008. That's when I started Alaska Pacific.
Gotcha. And then, so Christopher, you came in
1997.
Right. What was how did you experience the gay community in Anchorage in 97?
That's funny. It was that Christmas, my sisters and I went to the mall here at the Fifth Avenue Mall, and on a lark, we decided to get a picture with Santa Claus. And Santa Claus looks at me and says, "Here, sit on my lap. Would you like a candy cane?" And it was outrageously flirtatious, and my sisters looked at him and looked at me, and it was amazing. And there were a couple of gay bars, and there were lots of places to go. And so...
Because we had the Wave then. We had a gay club.
We actually had the Wave, and it was a great place to go. I met a lot of amazing people in that space. And now we have, of course, Myrna's, which evolved out of that, and there's been a long story there. But I did find it welcoming, and in fact, in some ways, it helped me here to come to peace with all of the internalized homophobia that I had, and the homophobia being fear about my health and my life and all of the judgment and all of the things that we all carry, conscious or not. And while, yes, it is different for kids these days, I think those issues are still real and pervasive in the community because kids still feel the need to come out. One of my missions in life is to end the need to come out. Why do we have to have this ritual? And but it's still very real when I talk to kids. But there's a lot more fluidity and flexibility, and kids can just choose to be themselves without as much judgment, which is wonderful because there's lots of more self-expression. In 2008, when Felix moved here, that's when we met because he joined Spectrum. Spectrum was the club at APU. My roommate at the time was Ben, and he was part of Spectrum. And so our association began all that way back then through that club, through a guy that lived in my house, a friend, mutual friend. So we've been friends since pretty much he got here.
Santa Maria doesn't have a gay bar, or does it?
It did at one point, but no, it does not.
How did you explore gayness prior to Anchorage, growing up in a place without a gay bar?
So San Luis Obispo, interestingly, it never really had a gay bar, but it had gay nights. And we all knew when those nights were. And kids, these were 18 and under and 18 and over clubs, not just 21. But and there was this lovely, lovely street scene on Garden Street in San Luis Obispo in front of a cafe called Linnea's. And still to this day, a number of us are associated through that place. And we made space for ourselves in the streets. We were not going to be unheard. And there were goth kids and ska kids and queer kids and hippies. And it was all happening on the street. It was an outrageous and beautiful scene. It was an absolute resistance to the buttoned up and horribly tight culture of the Reagan era and how there was this demand for conformity. We were not conformists, and there was no way they were going to make us be conformists. Friends getting arrested for sitting on the sidewalk, much like what you see here with the homeless conversation, but these are just kids being kids. And so, no, that's where I really explored it. But yes, of course, I did drive up to the Bay Area and down to LA and San Diego, where there were vibrant communities of people. And that's where I had my first experience with real strong gay community, because my experience on Garden Street was a community, but it was a community of misfits, which, have long held dear to my heart because I'm deeply a misfit. And so with that in mind, I did have to go to the Bay to find it. But then I realized, and now with the modern era, it's no longer like that. You don't have to be in enclaves because we're everywhere and we're connected, and we are no longer forced into the shadows.
So did you go out in San Antonio, Felix? I mean, but prior to moving to Anchorage, had you gone to a gay bar? Had you...
No. And, interestingly enough, so I went back to Texas for the first time in a long time for Christmas and New Year's, just this last Christmas and New Year's. And I struggled with the idea of should I explore gay San Antonio or not. I think in the end, I decided not to. Like, this was a foundational place for me, but there's still a negative sting and experience there that happened when I tried to come out. And it was, the first thing I did when I tried to come out was I called my best friend, and his response was, you should come to my church for conversion therapy. Even though he didn't say that, that's what he meant, right? And I actually went to my mom and I said, hey, can I go to my friend's church? And she was like, hell no, as long as you're being raised in this house, you're going to a Catholic church. That's it. And that negative experience still lives with me. And I don't know if I want to explore gay San Antonio.
So just to be clear, your mom was opposed to you going to a different church. She wasn't necessarily opposed to conversion therapy because she wasn't supportive of, or had she already evolved?
No, she hadn't evolved by then, but I didn't come out to my parents until I came out in college.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is before.
Yeah.
I've been to gay San Antonio.
Yeah.
It actually is very charming. There are about 3 or 4 gay bars that are really popular there. And I went down for a conference not too long ago, several years now, but not too long. And it was a vibrant community, very gracious people, lovely clubs, higher order of magnitude than anything we've ever seen here.
Well, I graduated from UT Austin, and so I'm like, come to Austin. Forget San Antonio. Let's move it to Assembly. Former Assembly chair, current vice chair. Can you both, we'll start with Felix, but talk a little bit about what your experience has been like as a politician in Anchorage and how that differed from your experience prior.
Yeah, for sure. So, for me, I'll just start really quickly with the prior stuff. So for me, prior, it was really politics was the game that I was in. It's where I worked. I managed campaigns, worked on campaigns from the congressional level down to the school board level.
And were you doing that in college, or was that like your first job after college?
It was first job after college, yeah. In college, I volunteered on a campaign, but that's as far as I went. So, that was sort of my chosen career path after I graduated. And, that's sort of one side of the coin is getting elected. And then the other side of the coin is what you do when you get elected. And so that was a totally different experience for me when I finally did get elected. I got a little bit of wisdom and experience serving in the mayor's office. After I helped Ethan Berkowitz get elected, I got a job in that office. It was a low-level job, but it was still a job that allowed me to learn about the municipality, the going-ons, and I got to get a lot of good experience in a few specific issue areas. So finally get elected, and now it's a totally different ballgame because everyone wants your time, wants your attention, and there's just all of these multitude of areas that you have to learn about, be experienced in, and just the amount of reading, the amount of just going through and, okay, I don't get this. What do I have to do to understand this? Oh, I have to read all of this to understand this one little specific area of the municipality. And there's all of these other areas in the municipality. And it's just, it's just amazing how complex local government is. And so for me, in the middle of all of that, and I was really excited when I first got elected, still am excited, but, I think there's nothing like, getting first elected and being like, okay, let's get to work, right?
2017,
yeah. And so I was really getting to work and then got a promotion in my job. And then, this thing that I think a lot of elected officials have to deal with, which is this work-life balance. And, when you say that to a lot of elected officials, they just laugh in your face because, what balance? There is no work-life balance. You're just trying to struggle and survive day to day with everything.
So you still have a day job that's separate from...
No.
Okay.
Actually, I had to quit that in 2019 because just things were getting too crazy, too hectic.
So 2019, can you talk about 2019?
Yeah, so 2019 was when I first became chair. And that's when I think I really hit my stride as an assembly member because, prior to that, I had tried to focus in a few different issue areas and, found my home in some places. But I think as chair, that's when I was like, okay, let's really get going. And that's when I started really, can I curse a
Yes.
little bit? Okay, that's when I really started kicking ass, taking names, doing what I was really passionate about. And, for me, what I think was important for me at the time being chair was this idea of co-equal branches of government. Like that idea had been just dug in the grave because of a strong mayor form of government. And I was intent on resurrecting that life and seeing if we could get back to co-equal branches of government. And so that was my mission.
Even though we had Berkowitz was mayor at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And so you felt like there was too much mayor power, even if you were you'd worked with Berkowitz before.
Yeah. So for sure, like the assembly worked very well with Berkowitz, but I think what a lot of people don't realize because, they think, oh, we're all on the same side, so we all get along. They don't realize, the little instances and times where we didn't necessarily get along, where we had different ideas and where we really needed to find a way to get to the table and find some collaborative path forward. It was a lot different than working, of course, with an administration that's like 180 degrees opposite from you. But still, there were these difficulties where it's like, okay, come on now, like respect the assembly, Ethan.
Well, I would disagree with you saying these little disagreements. There were all kinds of disagreements, big and small, about how we should proceed on any given question. I fought with them a lot because sometimes you really had to push them to get them to do the right thing. What I think was the right thing or the body thought was the right thing. And so that's one of the interesting things about it, right? With the difference that we have now.
And what year did you?
Same year, same day. We went from 0 to 2 queers in one day. And then we got to our third.
Well, I'll just say for listeners that the third member, Austin Quinn Davidson, was supposed to be here today. She's going to be on the podcast. So
yeah,
I wasn't just male gay only.
And I also want to speak to one of the lessons I had from the pandemic, this idea of work-life balance. I now truly reject it. I flip it. It must be the life-work balance. We have forever given over to this idea that work is the dominant principle in our lives. And I dispute that. Even though I work 3 jobs, I am always busy. I make my home life the first priority. And that's one of my evangelical missions since the pandemic. I've been drilling this into our clerk staff. I've been drilling this everywhere people will listen, that we have to reframe how we think. If the pandemic taught us one thing, work is not the center of our lives. It's our homes and where we keep our families. We still have to pay the bills and keep the lights on. And for those of us with a mission, we still have to meet our mission. But the fact is, your life has to be first. And we have, as a society, completely gotten it out of perspective. And this idea of work-life balance, which was an effort to tell people, hey, get balance in your life, maintains the priority of your work life as number one. And I can tell you I love my work and all of its facets, but I would give it all up to keep my home, my family, and the people I care for, centered and safe. And so to me, I just want to throw that in there.
What are your jobs?
So I have a real estate license. It's currently in referral status because there's just not a lot of time, but I make a bit of income from that. And then I serve at Aquila, where for 10 years, going on 11 now, I've served as kind of what's now called the Director of Strategic Growth. I help to write proposals, deliver reports, make sure money's coming in, and smooth over relations with the funding entities that exist. And then I serve on the Assembly. So that's the work that I do.
For those who may not know, Aquila is one of Alaska's oldest behavioral health programs, providing a full range of mental health services, including substance abuse treatment in Anchorage and other communities. So when you guys met in 2008, did you foresee being in politics together?
No, not for me. Like I sort of knew that there was going to be a trajectory where I might serve in office one day. But for me, it was like, maybe in my mid 30s, late 30s, that's when I would decide I'm ready, right? It was all for me about, okay, I got to get myself ready. I got to build up my resume, all the sort of traditional stuff that people think about and people do. And so, for me, when the calling came, when I was asked, I was like, whoa, I'm not ready for this, but I'm so glad that I eventually did say yes.
And for me, 2008, 2009 was a pretty important year. I we had a major economic calamity, 2007, 2008. I had lost a job just before that and been basically unemployable, working on contract and struggling as one of the kind of economic targets of that whole economic crisis. I was just right in the sweet spot. And so I lost almost everything. And I had been a bit depressed about it all. And I was on a walk in a dog park, actually, when I realized I was going to think about serving. But before I could do that, I had to do something. And I didn't think about it like I must do something to run. I was looking for ways to make my life better. And I looked around and there was a park in my neighborhood. And I was tired of driving 4 miles to get to this dog park over here, which was overused because there were 2 of them and everyone in Anchorage was taking their dogs to this or that park. We have high dog ownership. And so I set out to get a park in my neighborhood that I could walk my dogs to and let them off the leash and play. And little did I know at the time that getting a dog park in your neighborhood could be more difficult than winning a seat on the assembly, because I asked the Parks Department, how do I do this? And my friend Holly Spoth Torres, like, this is when we met. She said, this is what you have to do. You have to go to your community councils, get their input, and figure out how they're going to support this with you. If they are, then you go to the Parks and Rec Commission and you get their permission. Then you go to the assembly, because this will have to be a dedicated use for that park. And why was that park ideal? Nobody uses it except there were homeless people that were encamped in it. And in fact, 2 women that summer when I started this project drank themselves to death in that park. And so I sat out on this campaign. I worked door to door, neighbor to neighbor, community council to community council, got my community council support, Fairview. I was 4 lots into Fairview. Right, so right on the border of Fairview and South Addition. So Fairview supported it, but the park was actually in South Addition, the closest park to my house, and this park where all this trouble was at. And in South Addition, if you know that neighborhood, they have a particular view of how the world should be. And there are some members of that neighborhood who are going to fight like hell to keep it the way that it is. And so I started that campaign and organized the community, and we ended up having almost 150 people show up to a community council meeting at the senior center. And while I watched them cheat, double counting some people, and the chair at the time brought a 3-foot long claw hammer for a gavel. It was something I never could have imagined seeing, but I did. The vote was like 105 yes to 109 no's, 55 yes to 59 no's.
Right, really close.
Yeah, it was really close, and I lost. But again, I watched them cheat. But you realize at that point that you're not going to want to move a project that's going to divide a community in that way, right? If that's the division, then you need to step back and figure out a better plan, because, you don't want to turn neighbors against neighbors. Anyhow, so that process, though, at that moment, then I realized, what am I really fighting for here? What's important in this equation? Oh, people are killing themselves in our parks with alcohol. And so that actually led me into the work I do at Aquila, and it also set me on this path to try to resolve the question of homelessness in our neighborhood, especially the neighborhood downtown. And so that became a unifying force that lifted me up, and my neighbors, when the person who was in the seat before me was terming out, they, from corner to corner, said, Chris, you have to run. And so that's how it worked for me. Patrick Flynn, yeah. And so the neighborhood basically said, I'm not ready for this. Just like you said, like, how can you ever be ready to throw yourself into this mix? It's terrifying. It's complex. It's impossible. It's all of the things that tell you don't do this. And so you have to swallow all of that negativity and fear and doubt and insecurity that every human being has, this imposter syndrome, that the nagging voice in the back of your head, and to say, okay, I'm going to do it. And, there's a book called The Alchemist, and in it, Paulo Coelho, the character, Santiago, he is taught a very important lesson that once you commit to a plan, the whole universe will bend to help you achieve it. And I have found that to be true, that upon my commitment, boy, amazing how things came together. And in my specific race, 6 candidates, I managed to pull a 53% majority, which was mind-blowing.
And it was because you already had some name recognition because of all of your work for the dog park and getting involved in the homelessness. And
I wouldn't call it name recognition per se. I would call it relationships with the people in the neighborhood, right? The name recognition is an interesting phenomenon. It's, to me, all about the relationships.
And Felix, you ran for L.V. Gray Jackson's chair, correct?
Yeah,
and she is similar. So Patrick Flynn asked Chris,
no, he did not support me.
He didn't support you.
No.
So I misunderstood what you just said. So who approached you and said you had to run for
My
it?
neighbors.
Your neighbors. Okay,
Yeah,
so that was
people,
different.
the actual voters. Patrick actually studiously avoided taking a position in a 6-way race, which was fine. I didn't need him. We're friends and we get along great, but his position was, I am not getting in this race because it's not my decision who takes over for me.
Okay, I'm glad I clarified that.
Yeah.
You had a different experience, Felix.
Yes.
Alvy Gray Jackson talked to you about running, and you felt it was too soon.
Yeah, so LV approached me because she was termed out, and so she was going to be leaving the seat. And I was working in the mayor's office at the time, and, the decision was, okay, do I continue in the mayor's office? Do I decide to run for this seat or now, or do I just decide to run later in the future? And, I think I eventually, sort of similar to Chris, right? Convinced myself, okay, no, I'm ready. This is my time. Having worked in politics, I know that in politics, everything is about timing. You either go through that door when it's open or it is shut for you, right? So I decided it's time for me to go through that door and begin this journey.
Did being gay come up in your campaign?
Yeah, I would say, interestingly enough, I think for me, being gay, I think, came up in a lot of sort of innuendo kind of ways. I don't think it was very direct.
There was an attack piece. There was one male attack piece by Don Smith.
Don Smith did a whole bunch of attack pieces.
Yeah, so there was one that was very specifically anti-gay.
So there was one, I remember one attack piece that Don Smith put out that I think upset me more than any of the others. It was basically attacking me for being Latino. And basically saying Felix is gonna let all of the Mexican rapists, have their way in Anchorage. He pulled the he pulled the Trump.
And just for the record, Don Smith is commonly known as the father of the tax cap, but I've rebranded him as the illegitimate father of the tax cap because there are newspaper clips that have demonstrated he actually didn't propose or move the tax cap. It was a lady who did at the time. Don Smith just took the credit for it. So he's the illegitimate father of the tax cap.
You notice more the attack on your ethnicity than the attack on your sexuality.
For me, yeah, that was, I think, more noticeable.
And Chris, did your sexuality come up?
So it was my district is different than his district.
Right.
And it was lift for me. It was support from every corner. That was an asset, and it raised a lot of money for me, and it helped to position me for the win. And so it was never a negative. And, Felix probably saw this more than I did when he was the chair during this pandemic process. The homophobia in this town is rampant and awful, but it's not from the people who lift us up and support us and help us to win, because when our allies, and this is across the political spectrum, Republican, Democrat, independent, nonpartisan, when our allies see that kind of behavior, they anneal and come to us and support us. There's just, this community has that faction, but it doesn't tolerate it. And so when it comes at us, it's amazing what happens. The warmth and love and support that comes out of this community is overwhelming. For me, in the last year, it's happened a couple times.
Did you feel that the homophobia was rampant before you went on to the assembly?
It's always a thread. Yeah, it's always been there.
I guess it's just, as a gay man, my experience has been so different. I haven't been a public person in Anchorage, and I've never had anyone say any epithets to my face or seen anything or had anyone write comments on
but my old roommate, his friend, was walking downtown in front of what's now the 49th state with hand in hand with his boyfriend at the time. They had eggs thrown at them.
You did?
No. Our friend.
Oh, your friend, your neutral friend.
Previously discussed, my former housemate. They had eggs thrown at them. I mean, the reality is it's here.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that really, I think, stoked that homophobia was when Chris, Austin, and I sponsored the conversion therapy band.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's when it got, next level kind of stuff.
Disgusting.
People saying, we're pedophiles, we're doing this just so that we can get meat.
Yeah, that was
all kinds of disgusting things.
The Anchorage Assembly in August 2020 passed a ban on conversion therapy. This is the practice of trying to change a minor's sexual orientation or gender identity. The ordinance had widespread support among medical professionals and counselors, but drew criticism from some religious institutions and parents who felt the ban infringed on parental and religious rights. So that accusation of pedophile is so horribly inflammatory. How do you combat that? What can you say?
So my tactic is not to try to stop them from expressing themselves, right? So the other day, this happened at the dais, and my message was, hey, I don't want to stop this individual from making his testimony, but I want everyone to recognize on the record that this is what just happened. Because when the community knows and sees it, they reject it, right? And so to me, the idea is make them known.
Sunlight.
Yes, and then the community will know who those people are, and it drives them into the dark. It makes them be quiet because the pain that they experience from expressing their truth is enough to stop them. So to me, that's my methodology. It's just shine the light right on them and let everyone know.
Mm.
You know?
Do you feel that the recall against you had any roots in...
Yes, absolutely. I mean, they weren't trying to hide it, right? If you looked at some of the reasons that they wanted to recall me, the conversion therapy ban was like on the top of their list, right? And during the campaign, I just can't tell you how many sort of messages that I got. People would message me on Facebook, or they would call me and leave me nasty voicemails, just strictly based on this homophobic element. And one of the themes of the recall that I heard out in Save Anchorage was, we need to get rid of one of the queers. We have too many queers on the assembly. Let's get rid of one of them. So it was very prevalent.
Recently, since you've been vice chair, Christopher, we've had at least two very public, demonstrations.
Yeah. No, and it's so very interesting. Like the gut check reaction for the first one, Paul Kendall, was that room that just cheered with him. That was the gut check for me.
Right.
I don't care that some crazy old man talks trash. I've had that all my life. But when a mob joins in a chorus with him, that was very creepy. I don't have any better word for it.
Right. And I'll just say, Paul Kendall passed away. This was during COVID mitigation testimony. That was a very crazy time. Lots of national news coverage.
The worst in the country.
Yeah, for sure. Did you feel safe at that time? I mean, as an assembly member, like walking to your car, I mean, it just seemed like the fever pitch was high.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say no. At the time, I certainly didn't feel safe. I remember there was one meeting, I think it was October meeting, when, Chris, you were out and I was stepping in as the vice chair. And I think that was the meeting where I was legitimately scared. I wanted to make sure, okay, we're going to travel out as a group and we're going to have security and police come out with us so that we are safe when we go to the parking lot.
And that was the night that the COVID hit the administration.
Yeah.
And then, and so we've had massive security since. At one point, to Suzanne, the chair, there's this kind of story I want to make sure people get to understand about that night and the next night. It's the Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire thing. So Suzanne led an incredible, difficult conversation. That question, none of us wanted it. One of us brought it. It had to happen. We had it. But it wasn't passable because of that crazy mob. And so we went through 2 weeks of that process. And then finally, COVID hits. So the next day, Suzanne's like, I can't come in, Chris. You have to chair. I mean, she was abused, attacked, ran this mob process. The next day I come in. Nobody showed up. And somebody moves an emergency ordinance that immediately solves the problem. And I started getting phone calls right away. Oh my God, you were such a great leader. Look what you did. The room was easy to work with. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I actually just came and had the icing of the conversation. I didn't have to work for this other than sit next to her and help her for the 2-week process. She was the one who led us through that extraordinarily difficult conversation, and I somehow got the credit for it. So I always try to push the light back on Suzanne's leadership because she's the one. I just got to come in on the last day and when it was easy and it was orderly and no one was there. And so just that's kind of a sidebar. But I want people to know it wasn't me, that was Suzanne.
I want to go back in the conversation really quick to the difference between mayors. In what's become an infamous interview with Dick Cheney by Jeff Landfield, he talks about how Bronson is a very involved mayor who participates in assembly meetings, and that sort of contrasting him in a positive way, that previous mayors, and he specifically says Ethan Berkowitz, would often say no comment, I have nothing to add, I have nothing to say, not participating in the meeting itself. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between mayoral participation in meetings and how that's changed the flavor of the meetings?
I think for me, I think the most often that I talk with the mayor and his team is during assembly meetings, right? Because otherwise, good luck trying to talk with them. You have to send an email and hope that they will respond if you want to actually talk with a member of the administration. So for me, I think there's that opposite of where Bronson is like overly active in our assembly meetings and absent otherwise. Whereas Berkowitz, absent during our assembly meetings, sure. In terms of speaking and engaging, his philosophy was, this is the assembly's meeting. I don't need to be involved in it. But otherwise, we had a really great ability to be able to talk with him and communicate with his staff and work with his staff. So I think it's very much opposites in that way.
And for me, Ethan issued, I think, one veto that we overrode. And this mayor is just veto, and override. And so, I've been thinking about this quite a bit. There was this ridiculous ad by that blog that let's not be named, that organized, nothing to report. And it had zero impact on the election, but it was a pretty scathing ad. So I'm hopeful that an ad is developed that's, all these bombastic policies by this clown who thinks he knows, but demonstrates that he doesn't day in and day out. Veto, override, because the true policymakers of the city have always been the assembly when it exercises that authority, because that's what the charter grants us. And so we are not going to be run roughshod over by a team of fools that are attempting to tell the community one thing but do another thing. And so the theme right now is veto, override. And just this afternoon, we get to go override another one.
Right. Well, I wonder if it's the strategy of trying to make the assembly look like the crazy people because, for the upcoming election, being like, look, we're trying to rein them in. We got to fix this.
Oh, yeah. The mayor is absolutely targeting the assembly. I mean, he's been public about it even before he got sworn in, after he got elected. He started going to fundraisers and saying, all right, guys, I need your help now that you elected me. We need to get rid of some of these assembly members. And that has been his goal.
And he called us enemies. I mean, He actually used the term enemy, which is a failure to understand the duty of a mayor under the charter that we have that says we should be working together. And so he has effectively done that. But, in terms of framing a group as crazy, they tried to make the security go home. They tried to turn off the video stream. They tried to send the police out.
As Felix just said, at a time when you felt the most danger in the room.
And so, in the end, the public, I believe, is paying close attention to what's happening, and they're not being bamboozled by the false premise that he continues to argue. The fluoride issue is another perfect example. He goes in, turns off the fluoride, and then his team says that wasn't a violation of the code, even though it's plain right there. And so it's just like, they are trying to perfect the art of gaslighting, but they're not being successful because they're just, frankly, not that smart.
Two questions for you, because I know we're getting towards the end of our time. The first one is the mayor made a very public apology to you after the Paul Kendall incident.
Right.
And I was in the room. It sounded like a good apology to me. How can you talk about that apology? And
to think about that, it was, I would say it was genuine. There's no reason to discount it as any other thing. And we have 1,000 ways we can disagree on who I prefer to have as my most intimate relations. It's probably one that he doesn't care so much about. But that mob is his, right? The way that that mob behaves is his, and all you need to know to understand that is one day of the debates, there are yellow stars being wielded at us with hissing sounds and people pointing at the one Jewish man, open Jewish man on the body in the most anti-Semitic gesture I've ever witnessed in my life. And it was rallied by them. I saw his staff cheering for them that day. And then when he realized that he had crossed the line, when he had people from around the world talking about that, the next day he puts out a message, and guess what? One person shows up with a yellow star and quickly realizes he made a mistake and tucks it into his pants and it disappears. Mm-hmm. And so if there's one thing that the public needs to understand is all of the behaviors of that mob are the behaviors of that mayor and his expressed will. And so the apology was important and I'm grateful for it. And what's better is control your mob, because your mob is what's causing the toxicity in our community. And so to me, that was a small gesture and well received, but the reality is there's a broader implication to what's happening right now and who is the boss.
Second question, speaking of who is the boss, and you may not want to answer this. The mayor has said that city manager Domboski is running the city. Mm-hmm. It appears that that is the case. Mm-hmm. And you guys had a very public friendship when you were on the assembly together.
Right.
Can you talk about the status of that friendship, what your relationship is like with her now?
Yeah, so there are many very specific details I won't get into at this time. I actually feel sorry for her at this point because she has consolidated all power to herself. All communications from all department heads must come to her, to the assembly. Think about how difficult that is. This is a 3,000-person corporation running a 300,000-person city. That's the heart of the economic hub of the state of Alaska. And she has made it so all roads lead through her. So she is the municipal manager. She is the director of the Department of Community and Economic Development. She's in charge of water utility. She's all of it. She's the director, the boss. So she's the acting mayor as well, because the mayor, while he puts on a good bluster, he's out doing social events. He's not being the mayor. She is. Now think about this. So we have an election coming up, and a member from Eagle River is no longer going to be running for office. So the conservative faction of the body, its brain trust, the most skilled parliamentarian they're going to have is the other member from Eagle River, who 2 years in still can't make a motion properly. What that means is poor Amy Domboski is going to have to be the municipal manager, the director of all the departments individually, the acting mayor, and the chief parliamentarian for the conservative faction. It's going to cause her to have a nervous breakdown and get the worst case of shingles, and it's a disaster for her. And so from a personal level, plenty of records demonstrate that she stabbed me pretty hard in making some gross accusations for political gain. And to me, trust is the heart of our work. And so if there is no trust, you can't do the work. And, interestingly, that member from Eagle River made some argument recently that, these folks must be having secret meetings because they're making these decisions so easily. I'm like, yeah, you tell us how you think. That's how you would do this thing. But what we have, the secret sauce that we have right now, as a body, we trust each other. If somebody says something, we know they mean it. And if they say they're going to do something, we know they're going to do it. And it's amazing what trust can do to achieve collective impact, right? If you don't have trust, everybody's paranoid, wearing their foil hats, looking out for each other. That's how I characterize the 8th floor. In fact, there's a report out there that they're so convinced that we're spying on them, that we've bugged their offices because their bad ideas get out into the community. No, we don't bug your office. We didn't need to do that. You surround yourself with people who don't trust you, and you surround yourself with bad ideas. That's what happens. And so me and mine choose trust with good people, because that in the end is how you make good policy, and that's how you overcome these difficult times.
Last question, and it is a personal question you guys don't have to answer, but I'm sure people are curious. I mean, I don't know, like, are you in a relationship?
That's great. No, I am faithfully single.
And same question to you, Christopher.
It's interesting for me. I am single as well. Everyone thinks I'm married and have a partner. I have a best friend I live with, and we do have a family unit because we've been friends for a long time. But everyone assumes we're in a relationship. We are not. He has his own. And so, but for me, no.
Well, I would imagine it'd be very difficult to date in Anchorage as a very public assembly member. Mm-hmm. I mean, are you able to do that?
I have found it very difficult to do that. And especially because, like, in my generation, a lot of initial communications start on apps, right? And so, back in the day, I used to use some of those apps.
Can't do it.
But I couldn't do it anymore because I literally got threatened on one of those apps. Someone said, "Hey, what are you doing on here? I know who you are. I can ruin your political life." Yeah. And that was when I was like, okay, shutting this down. And for me, that closed off a lot of opportunities.
Same, sharing pictures is the currency of the kingdom.
Right.
Right. And someone's like, here. And I'm like, I can't. And they're like, you don't trust me. And I'm like, that's not it at all.
Like, I need a face pic.
It's a principle.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually dated someone for almost 2 years. And nobody knew because everyone assumes my roommate is my partner, which is great because it gives me a shield where I can, in fact, have a private life. But that person I fell in love with, and my life wasn't just one handful. It was more than 2 handfuls, and they couldn't juggle it. And so I lost out on that because of the dynamics of my life. And I still am in love with that person and have yet to meet another person who even comes anywhere close. And so I pine and wait and hope that I meet somebody who meets that mark because the mark has been set high.
I mean, are you looking for, do you want people to introduce you?
So you can find a record of me giving a story at Arctic Entries, right? And so there's a link. I don't know if you've listened, but so this was the week that marriage became legal in Alaska, and I had a totally different story set. But like 48 hours before I'm on the stage in front of 1,000 people, marriage happens. I'm like, that's the story I got to tell, and so I tell my history. And the theme that night was like tales of the impossible, and I'm like, I am going to tell the tale of the impossible. We won marriage. And so I ended the story on it. And the next impossible task, finding someone to marry, right? So I told this whole story, 7 minutes of I'm queer and I'm single. I got 7 asks for a date. And they were all women.
Oh my gosh.
So for my part, I don't know what the answer is. It's a very difficult equation up here. That's the impossible.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you both so much for doing this today. Y'all are great. This has been a really good conversation, and I'm really grateful to you guys for being so generous with your time. I know you guys have a million meetings to go to, so thanks again.
We have to go to an override party.
I know, you got to go to an override party. We'll have a wonderful override party, and I hope I'll have you on again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to Corey Coolidge for making this podcast listenable, and big thanks to you, our listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and recommend us to a friend. We also host Zoom events. Visit eastanchoragebookclub.com for more information. You can email us at eastanchoragebookclub@gmail.com. In 2 weeks, we will have a special episode about the influence of Donald Trump's Republican Party in our local politics. We specifically examine a local organization called Save Anchorage. Our guests will be independent journalist Matt Buxton and community organizer Yarrow Silvers, with commentary from the Blue Alaskan. Please tune in.